What's the point of having a mother if she's useless? My son spat the words at me across the kitchen table, his voice as cold and polished as the Tesla in my driveway. He wanted my life savings. I said no. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the man he had become, and the mother who had raised him before he turned on his heel and left. The door slammed. Silence rushed in like a tide. I stood there, flour on my hands, lemon cake cooling on the counter, the old grandfather clock marking the seconds in the corner. 35 birthdays, 35 cakes, and for the first time, I wondered if any of it had ever mattered. I looked out the kitchen window at the old oak tree Robert had planted when Leo was born. Its branches were heavy with autumn leaves, a riot of orange and gold against the pale blue sky. Robert used to say, "Helen, we're not planting a tree. We're planting roots." And we had. Our lives were woven into this house, into the worn spots on the Persian rug in the living room, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe measuring Leo's height, the comfortable dip in Robert's armchair. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was a life built on solid ground. A life of promises kept. Robert's most important promise had been his last. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, his hand cool in mine, he'd whispered, "The money is for you, Helen, for your peace. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to be a hero with it. Just live. Just be safe." The money, our nest egg. The careful accumulation of a lifetime of his work as an engineer and my 30 years as a town librarian. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for peace. Enough to be safe. A low, electric hum, almost silent, pulled me from my thoughts. Through the window, I saw a car that looked like a polished river stone glide into my driveway. A Tesla, Leo's latest acquisition. It was a stunning piece of machinery, but it looked alien, parked next to my sturdy, 10-year-old Subaru, like a spaceship landing in a quiet pasture. The front door opened and closed, and then he was there, standing in the doorway of my kitchen. Leo. He filled the space. All sharp angles and expensive fabric, a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to. A sleek watch glinting on his wrist. He brought a gust of cold autumn air with him, and the scent of a cologne that smelled like cedar and ambition. "Smells like my birthday in here," he said, a smile playing on his lips. It was the same smile that could charm anyone, the one he'd used to get out of trouble since he was 5. My heart did a familiar little flip. No matter how old he got, how successful he became, he was still my boy. "I was just about to make the frosting," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "You're just in time to lick the bowl." He chuckled, a polite sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Tempting, Mom, but I can't. Got a call with a venture capital firm in 30 minutes. He walked further into the kitchen, his polished leather shoes clicking softly on my linoleum floor. His eyes swept over the room, the familiar floral wallpaper. The oak cabinets Robert and I had installed ourselves one summer. The slightly faded curtains. It wasn't a critical gaze. Not exactly. It was more like an appraisal. The way he might look at a company he was thinking of acquiring. Distant. "Actually," he said, leaning against the counter, "I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to talk to you about something. About the birthday." In a way, I felt a small knot of unease begin to form in my stomach. His tone was too casual. "Oh, I was just going to ask when you'd be free for your birthday dinner. I was thinking of making that pot roast you love. Maybe invite your Aunt Sarah over." He held up a hand, stopping me. "We'll do that, for sure. But I was thinking of something bigger this year. A real legacy project. Something Dad would have been proud of." He spoke of his father often when he wanted something. He knew it was my weakest point. "Your father was proud of you, Leo," I said softly. "Not of your projects." "He was proud of building things," Leo countered, his voice smooth and practiced. "My new venture, it's in AI logistics. It's going to revolutionize the shipping industry. We have a fund that's willing to match our initial seed investment, dollar for dollar. It's the kind of opportunity that only comes once. The knot in my stomach tightened. I knew what was coming. I'd felt this strange, premonitory dread for weeks, ever since he'd started dropping hints about needing to be aggressive and fully capitalized. Leo, I started. That sounds wonderful. But you know my finances are quiet. It was the word Robert and I used. Not poor, not stretched, just quiet. That's the thing, Mom, he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were bright with an unnerving, feverish intensity. It's about making that quiet money loud, making it work for us, for the family legacy. He took a breath. For my birthday. I don't want a dinner or a cake. I want you to invest in me. $75,000. It's the last piece I need to secure the matching fund. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to grow louder, each tick a hammer blow against the sudden, ringing silence in the room. $75,000. He said it so easily, as if he were asking for a cup of sugar. It wasn't just a sum of money. It was my roof. It was my hospital bills. It was the promise I made to Robert. It was my peace, my safety. I leaned back against the counter, feeling the cool formica press into my spine. I had to steady myself. Leo, that's not a birthday gift. That's a huge part of my retirement fund. It's what your father and I saved. He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture so casual it stole my breath. And it's just sitting there, Mom, in some low-yield index fund, probably not even keeping up with inflation. Money is a tool. It's meant to be used, to build things. Think of it as an investment in your own future. The returns would be 10 times what you're making now. We're talking about securing our family for generations. Our family. He meant his future children, his future life in a world of polished stone cars and $1,000 coats. My world, the one with the oak tree and the worn armchair, didn't seem to be part of that equation. It's not just sitting there, Leo, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's my security. It's the promise I made to your father. He sighed, a sound of strained patience, as if I were a child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. Dad would have wanted this. He believed in taking smart risks. He pushed himself off the counter and walked towards me, placing his hands on my shoulders. His touch felt heavy, proprietary. Look, I know it's a big number. Don't answer right now. Just think about it. Think about what it could mean for us. He squeezed my shoulders, then turned and walked out of the kitchen. The front door opened and closed. Through the window, I watched the silent, sleek car back out of the driveway and disappear down the street, leaving a profound and unnerving quiet in its wake. I stood there for a long time, my hands still covered in flour. The rich, sweet smell of the cooling lemon cake suddenly seemed cloying, sickening. The warm, comforting heart of my home had been invaded by something cold and sharp. He had looked at the life Robert and I had carefully built, a life of love and modest security, and had seen nothing more than an untapped resource. A tool. I looked at the 3 perfect layers of cake on the counter, a testament to 35 years of a mother's love. And for the first time in my life, I felt the bitter sting of a question I had never dared to ask. What was all that love worth to him? The week crawled by in a state of suspended animation. The air in my house remained heavy with the ghost of Leo's request, a question mark hanging in every room. I didn't hear from him, and I didn't call. The lemon cake sat untouched on the counter for 2 days before I finally threw it out. The act, feeling like a small, sad surrender. His birthday arrived not with celebration, but with a quiet dread. He sent a text in the morning, not an apology, but an address. A restaurant called Aperture downtown. My real party. 8 p.m. Be there. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Aperture wasn't a restaurant, it was a statement. all polished concrete, exposed ductwork, and cold, architectural lighting that made everyone look like they were posing for a magazine. A low, thumping electronic beat pulsed from hidden speakers, and the air was thick with the competing scents of truffle oil and 100 different expensive perfumes. The chatter wasn't the warm babble of a family gathering, but a sharp, competitive hum of voices talking about funding rounds, market caps, and trips to Dubai. I stood in the doorway, my simple navy blue dress and the modest pearls Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, feeling like a wool coat in a swimming pool. In my hands, I clutched a small, neatly wrapped box. It felt like the only real thing in the room. "Mom, over here!" Leo's voice cut through the noise. He was holding court at a long table in the center of the room, surrounded by a dozen people who were all young, sharp, and dressed in shades of black. They looked less like a group of friends and more like a board of directors. As I approached, a woman with hair as sleek and black as polished obsidian detached herself from Leo's side. She was beautiful, but it was a hard, unforgiving beauty. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "You must be Helen," she said, her voice a low purr. "I'm Chloe. I've heard so much about you." She took in my dress, my shoes, my handbag, in a single, sweeping glance that was as dismissive as it was quick. "It's lovely to finally meet you," I lied, my hand feeling small and rough in her perfectly manicured one. "Leo is just a force of nature, isn't he?" she continued, her eyes flicking back to him with an expression of pure possession. "He's building an empire. You must be so incredibly proud." There was an edge to her voice, a subtle challenge, as if my quiet life in the suburbs was somehow a direct contradiction to the pride I was supposed to feel. "I've always been proud of him," I said, my voice steady. The small talk was excruciating. His friends spoke a language I didn't understand, a dialect of acronyms and brand names. They asked me what I did, and when I said I was a retired librarian, they gave me the same polite, blank smiles I'm sure they'd give a talking dog. I was a novelty, a relic. Leo's quaint origin story. After a dinner consisting of tiny, artfully arranged portions of food, Chloe clinked her fork against a champagne flute. "Time for gifts," she announced, her voice cutting through the din. A few expensive-looking bags were pushed toward Leo. He opened them with practiced nonchalance, a $500 bottle of scotch, a drone the size of a dinner plate, a leather briefcase with his initials monogrammed in gold. Then, Chloe looked directly at me. "Helen, you have something for the birthday boy, don't you?" Every eye at the table turned to me. My heart hammered against my ribs. This felt like a trap. I slid the small box across the table. "It was your father's," I said, my voice a little shaky. "I had it restored for you." Leo picked it up. His movements were slow, almost reluctant. He unwrapped the paper carefully and opened the velvet box. Inside, resting on a bed of satin, was Robert's old watch. It was a simple, elegant timepiece from the 1960s, with a clean face and a worn leather strap. The watchmakers had done a beautiful job. The crystal was clear. The silver case gleamed under the cold restaurant lights, and you could hear the faint, steady tick-tick-tick of its movement. "When you were born," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "your father put this watch in your crib. He said he wanted you to understand that time was the most valuable thing a man had. More than money. More than success. How you spend it is who you are." A heavy silence fell over the table. Leo stared at the watch, his expression unreadable. Chloe leaned in, her red lips curling into a semblance of a smile. "Oh," she breathed, her voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's vintage." The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Vintage, like a piece of junk from a thrift store. One of the friends snickered. Leo's face, which had been blank, hardened. The moment was broken. He snapped the box shut. the click echoing in the sudden quiet. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice flat. He pushed the box to the side of the table, next to a discarded napkin. "It's very thoughtful." The dismissal was so complete, so absolute. It felt like a physical slap. The conversation around the table quickly resumed, leaving me in a cold pocket of silence. My husband's legacy, our legacy cast aside like an unwanted party favor. Later, while he was saying goodbye to some guests near the bar, I knew I couldn't leave things as they were. I walked over to him, my legs feeling unsteady. "Leo, we need to talk." He turned, his smile fading as he saw my expression. "Mom, not here. It's my party." "It will only take a minute," I insisted, leading him to a small, quiet alcove near the entrance. I took a deep breath, the cold, conditioned air doing little to calm my racing heart. "About your request, the answer is no," I said it quietly. But the word landed between us with the force of a dropped stone. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. "No, just no? I cannot give you my retirement savings, Leo. It's not just money. It's a promise I made to your father. It's my security for the rest of my life. It's not an investment fund for you to play with." His face, which had been flushed with champagne and success, went pale. He looked at me as if he'd never really seen me before, not as his mother, but as an obstacle, an impediment to his will. "A promise to a dead man is more important than my future?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I come to you with the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to finally make our name mean something, and you offer me a broken-down watch and a lecture on promises." He took a step closer, his cologne suddenly overwhelming. The charming, successful son was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone cold and sharp and cruel. "Tell me something," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "What's the point of having a mother if she's useless when you actually need her?" Useless. The word didn't just hurt, it erased me. It took 35 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, packed lunches, and lemon birthday cakes, and incinerated them in a single, hateful breath. It took all the love I had, all the sacrifices Robert and I had made, and declared them worthless. I couldn't breathe. The thumping music of the party, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All I could hear was that one word, echoing in the hollow space he had just carved out inside my heart. Useless. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on me and strode back into the bright, loud room, rejoining his life, leaving me alone in the shadows. I stood there, frozen, for a minute that stretched into an eternity. Then, I turned and walked to the coat check, my movements stiff and robotic. I didn't say goodbye. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the valet brought my old Subaru around. It looked small and foolish next to the lineup of BMWs and Porsches. I got in and drove home, the city lights blurring through my tears. On the table at the restaurant, amongst the empty glasses and dessert plates, the small velvet box containing Robert's watch sat alone, forgotten. A useless gift from a useless mother. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and shadows. I don't remember parking the car or walking up the front path. My first clear memory is of standing in the silent hallway of my own home, the key still in my hand. The grandfather clock struck 1, its deep chime echoing in the profound emptiness of the house. The sound, once a comfort, now felt like a judgment, marking the first hour of a new and terrible reality. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the darkness to the living room and sank into the deep leather of Robert's armchair. The worn material still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice, a scent that had been my sanctuary for 40 years. Tonight, it offered no comfort. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was the sneer on Chloe's face, the cold dismissal in Leo's eyes, and all I could hear was his voice, a venomous whisper that coiled around my heart and squeezed. Useless. The word replayed itself on a relentless loop. It was the soundtrack to a highlight reel of my life's biggest mistakes. Every scraped knee I had kissed. Every bedtime story I had read. Every penny I had saved for his future. Every sacrifice, big and small, was recast in the harsh light of that single, brutal word. Had I raised a son, or had I merely funded a monster? The love that had been the bedrock of my existence now felt like a fool's delusion. I had poured my entire life into a vessel that was not only empty but had a gaping hole in the bottom. Grief is supposed to be a hot, cleansing fire. This was different. This was an icy flood, a paralyzing cold that seeped into my bones. I sat there for hours, a statue carved from sorrow, as the moon traced its slow, indifferent path across the sky. The clock struck 2, then 3, and somewhere in the hollow space between those chimes, something inside me shifted. The ice didn't thaw. It hardened. It sharpened into a point. My movements, when they finally came, were not those of a grieving mother. They were slow, deliberate, devoid of hesitation. I stood up, walked into Robert's study, and switched on the small green banker's lamp on his desk. It cast a small, focused pool of light, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. The room was a shrine to my husband's meticulous nature books, arranged by subject, pens aligned in a neat row, files labeled in his precise, architectural script. This was a room of logic, of facts. It was exactly what I needed. From the bottom of the large filing cabinet, I pulled out a heavy metal lockbox. The key, which I hadn't touched in the 2 years since Robert's death, it was in its usual place in the desk drawer. The click of the lock opening was unnaturally loud in the silent house. Inside were the archives of our life together, a financial history told through stacks of manila folders. Vance Family Finances. Robert had labeled the box. Not savings, not investments, family. I started with the oldest files first. On the large mahogany desk, under the warm glow of the lamp, I laid out the story of our sacrifice. It began with a folder labeled Leo, College Fund. Inside were the tuition receipts from New York University, each one a staggering sum that had made us catch our breath at the time. I remembered the conversation, sitting at this very desk with Robert. To pay for Leo's senior year, we'd had to sell the small portfolio of blue-chip stocks Robert's father had left him. It's seed corn, Helen, Robert had said, his voice heavy. But a good farmer knows the best soil to plant it in. And our son is good soil. With a steady hand, I wrote the number on a legal pad. $240. 000. Next came the folder for Innovatech, Leo's first startup. My hand trembled as I opened it. Here it was, the wire transfer confirmation for $150,000. It was dated 10 years ago. I remembered Leo's presentation, his charisma filling our small living room, his talk of changing the world with an app. Robert had been skeptical. He was a man who believed in tangible things, bridges, buildings, things you could touch. An app was just air to him. But I had seen the fire in Leo's eyes, and I had persuaded my husband. It's his dream. Robert, I'd said, when did we get too old to believe in dreams? Tucked behind the bank statement was a brochure for a cruise to Italy. On the back, in Robert's handwriting, was a short, simple note, our Italian vacation fund, for Leo's dream instead. It will be worth it to see him fly. A tear, hot and sharp, fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. He never saw Italy. We had postponed the trip for this. For Leo's dream. I added the number to the list, my pen digging into the paper. I worked through the night, the pile of documents growing. There were canceled checks for rent assistance during a supposed downturn, credit card statements with thousands of dollars of Leo's debt that we had quietly paid off to protect his credit score, a co-signed loan for his first car, which he'd sold a year later without ever paying us back. Each document was a small betrayal, a minor cut that I had ignored at the time. But now, laid out together, they revealed a pattern of 1,000 cuts, a slow, methodical bleeding of our life's work. As the first pale, gray light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, I finished. I picked up Robert's old adding machine, the heavy one with the paper roll. I entered each number. The loud, mechanical clack-clack-clack of the keys, a final, brutal tally. When I was done, I pressed the total button. The machine whirred for a moment before spitting out the answer on a thin ribbon of paper. I stared at the number, printed in stark black ink. $425. 000. Almost $500,000. Our Italian cruise. Robert's dream of retiring early to build his workshop. My dream of a life without financial worry. All of it, converted into fuel for Leo's ambition. All of it, rendered useless. I didn't cry anymore. The grief had been burned away by the sheer, staggering weight of that number. What remained was a cold, pure, and unfamiliar clarity. The love I felt for my son had not been a strength, it had been a liability. My generosity had not been a virtue, it had been a fatal flaw. I carefully tore the paper strip from the adding machine. It felt heavier than a stone. I folded the small white rectangle with its damning final number and slipped it into the pocket of my housecoat. It felt like a shard of ice against my skin. I stood up and walked to the window, watching as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the lawn. The world was waking up to a new day, and so was I. The heartbroken mother who had walked into this study hours ago was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone who understood that a debt had been incurred, and that it was long past time for it to be accounted for. 2 days passed in a strange, hyper-focused calm. The grief had receded, leaving behind a hard, crystalline clarity. I moved through my house with a newfound purpose, cleaning out closets, polishing silver, tending to the things Robert and I had built as if preparing them for a long siege. On Sunday morning, I was in the sunroom, misting the delicate, paper-thin petals of my orchids. When the phone rang, the screen lit up with Leo's name. For a moment, I let it ring. The cheerful, chirping sound, a violation of the quiet I had cultivated. The old me, the mother I had been just a few days ago, would have snatched it up, her heart leaping with a desperate, forgiving hope. The new me simply watched it, my face impassive. I took a slow, deliberate breath, snipped a dead leaf from a phalaenopsis, and then answered, placing the phone on the small glass table beside me and pressing the speaker button. "Mom?" Leo's voice was a soft, hesitant balm, engineered for maximum effect. It was the voice he used when he'd broken a window as a child, the one that had always melted my resolve. "Mom, thank God. I was so worried." I said nothing. I continued my work, the gentle snip of my shears, the only sound from my end of the line. "Listen," he began, a carefully rehearsed sigh coloring his words. "About my birthday. I was a complete jerk. There's no excuse. The pressure with this launch has been immense. I'm running on fumes, dealing with investors who breathe down my neck every second. I'm not myself. The things I said, they were horrible. That's not who I am. And it's not how I feel about you. You know that, right?" It was a masterful performance. Every word was chosen to elicit sympathy, to paint him as a victim of his own ambition. He wasn't apologizing for the substance of his cruelty, only for its clumsy execution. He was apologizing because his first attempt to get the money had failed. I finished with the orchid and turned to a nearby fern, my movements unhurried. "I understand the words you're saying, Leo," I said, my voice calm and even. A pause. My response was not in the script he had prepared. He was expecting tears, absolution, the familiar rush of my maternal forgiveness. "Okay," he said, thrown off balance. "Well, good. I want to make it right. I want us to get past this. I was thinking, maybe the best way to do that is for us to be partners in this. For you to be part of the success. It would be a fresh start for us. There it was. The pivot. The masterful turn from hollow apology back to the original demand. He was relentless. I picked up the phone, the cool glass solid in my hand. The time for quiet defiance was over. The discussion about the money is over. Leo, I said. My voice was not angry or emotional. It was a statement of fact, as final and unyielding as granite. The answer was no on Wednesday, and it is still no today. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not a pause for dramatic effect, but a void where his charm and confidence had just been. "You're really going to do this?" he finally asked. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling disbelief. "You're going to hold one stupid comment against me and torpedo my entire future over a sentimental promise?" "This isn't about a comment," I replied, my voice like ice. "This is about my life, the one your father and I built. It is not for sale, and it is not collateral for your ambitions." A short, sharp, ugly sound came through the speaker, a humorless laugh. "Fine," he spat, and the transformation was complete. The charming son vanished, and in his place was the cold, cruel stranger from the restaurant. "You want to talk about finances, Mom? Let's talk about real finances. Let's talk about the lease on my downtown office space. The one in the Polaris Tower that gives my company the credibility it needs to attract investors. You remember that, don't you? You sat right there in that sterile leasing office and signed your name next to mine. Your perfect credit score was the only reason they approved a startup with no revenue history." My blood ran cold. I sank onto the small wicker chair. The phone clutched in my hand. I had forgotten. In the flurry of his initial success, his grand promises, I had signed the 5-year lease as his guarantor. It had seemed like such a small, supportive gesture at the time. "The quarterly payment is due in 2 weeks," he continued, his voice a weapon, each word sharpened with malice. "It's a payment I can't make if I don't close this funding round. And if I can't pay, the corporation that owns the building, a multi-billion-dollar entity with a very aggressive legal team, will come after the co-signer. That's you." He let the words hang in the air. "A public execution of my security. They will drain your bank accounts," he said with chilling precision. "They will put a lien on your house. Your credit, that perfect score you and Dad were so proud of, will be worthless overnight. Everything your precious Robert worked his entire life to protect will be gone, tied up in the spectacular failure of the son you refuse to help. So you go ahead. You keep your promise to a dead man. Let's see what it leaves you with." I felt a surge of pure, sickening fear, the feeling of a floor giving way beneath me. He had planned this. Not consciously, perhaps, but his entitlement had laid these traps for me all along, weaving my security into the fabric of his risk. My love and trust had been turned into a weapon to be used against me. He waited, expecting me to break, to plead, to finally give in. I looked down at the small, folded strip of paper from the adding machine, which I'd placed on the table. $425. 000. The price I had already paid. He was not asking for an investment. He was demanding the rest. I pressed the cold, hard anger down, transforming it into steel. My voice, when I spoke, was barely a whisper, but it was completely steady. "Are you finished?" The question stunned him into silence. He stammered. "What?" Because if you are," I said, cutting him off. "I have things to do." And I ended the call. The phone fell from my hand onto the cushioned chair. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs, and a cold sweat slicked my skin. I was terrified. But beneath the terror was something else. A grim, absolute certainty. This was not a negotiation with my son. This was a war against an extortionist. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could not win it alone. My hand shook as I scrolled through my contacts, past Leo's name, until I found the one person who had always seen him for what he was. I pressed the button to call my sister. My sister, Sarah, arrived 3 hours later. She drove up from the city in a sensible sedan, emerging from the car like a force of nature. Where I am, soft edges and quiet contemplation. Sarah is sharp angles and decisive action. She's 2 years younger, an accountant with a firm downtown, and she has always possessed the kind of brutal pragmatism that I, in my haze of maternal idealism, had long mistaken for cynicism. She enveloped me in a hug on the front porch, her embrace firm and brief. "I took the rest of the week off," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument as she stepped inside. "Where's the coffee?" "In Robert's study," which had now become my war room. I laid out the story. I told her everything: the restaurant, the rejected watch, the cold, calculated cruelty of his words. I recounted the final, threatening phone call, my voice trembling as I repeated the part about the lease and the threat to my credit. When I finished, I pushed the small, folded strip from the adding machine across the polished surface of the desk. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the number. A muscle in her jaw tightened. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would be okay. She simply nodded, her expression grim. "So," she said, her voice devoid of surprise, "the golden boy finally melted down his halo to sell it for scrap. I can't say I'm shocked, Helen, but I am sorry you had to see it." That was the closest Sarah would ever come to saying, "I told you so," though we both knew she had, in her own subtle ways, for years. She had always been immune to Leo's charm, viewing him less as a beloved nephew and more as a high-risk, emotionally volatile stock she would never advise a client to buy. She set her briefcase on the desk and opened it, revealing a sleek laptop and a series of color-coded files. "All right," she said, her entire demeanor shifting. The sister was gone, replaced by the forensic accountant. No more tears. No more what-ifs. This is a financial problem now, and that's a language I speak. I need to see everything. Every document you ever signed for him. Every bank transfer. The articles of incorporation for this first company of his, and especially that office lease. For the next 10 hours, the study was a whirlwind of focused activity. I unearthed files I hadn't looked at in a decade, while Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face illuminated by the cool blue light of the screen, the room filled with the scent of brewing coffee and the low hum of her laptop's fan. The ticking of the grandfather clock was no longer a judgment but a deadline, counting down the 2 weeks until Leo's lease payment was due. I provided the narrative, the emotional context for each transaction. This was when he expanded his team. He said he needed to project success to attract talent. I'd explain, pointing to a wire transfer. Sarah would just grunt, her eyes scanning spreadsheets. "Success is profit, Helen, not expensive office chairs. Go on." Around midnight, she stopped. She was staring at the documents for the sale of Innovatech, Leo's first company. From the outside, the sale had been his crowning achievement. He'd told us he'd sold it to a West Coast tech conglomerate for a handsome sum. It was the reason he could afford the Tesla and the life that went with it. "This is weird," Sarah muttered, tapping her screen. "He didn't sell it to a conglomerate. He sold it to a holding company with a post office box in Delaware. There are no other assets listed under its name." "What does that mean?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a familiar knot of dread. "It means the buyer is a ghost," she said. "And look at this payout structure. A small amount up front, with the vast majority tied to 5 years of performance benchmarks. But the benchmarks are all based on user retention and growth metrics from the old company." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "It's a shell game, Helen. He found a buyer who was willing to bet on the future. based on a past that he presented to them. Her focus became razor sharp. She started pulling public records, vendor contracts, anything she could find on Innovatech's operational history. The story that emerged from the digital breadcrumbs was uglier than I could have imagined. There was a lawsuit from a former supplier, settled quickly and quietly out of court. A string of defaults on server payments. A half-dozen angry comments on a tech forum from former employees complaining about bounced paychecks. And then, Sarah found it. The smoking gun. An online portfolio of a freelance data analyst who had briefly contracted with Innovatech. To showcase his skills, he'd posted a case study anonymized. Of course, of a project he'd done for them a month before the sale. It detailed his process for cleaning and validating the user database to eliminate bot accounts and inactive users. Sarah's breath hissed through her teeth. She pulled up the official sales prospectus for Innovatech and placed her laptop next to the analyst's report on the desk. "Look," she said, her voice a low, angry hum. The prospectus Leo gave the buyer claims 350,000 active monthly users. She pointed to the analyst's case study. This poor kid, trying to get a job, proudly explains how he identified and scrubbed over 200,000 ghost accounts from the system. The real number of users was barely a third of what Leo claimed. The room fell silent. The clock chimed 3 a.m. "My God," I whispered, sinking into the chair opposite her. "He lied. He committed fraud." "It's worse than that," Sarah said, her face pale in the lamplight. She began connecting the dots out loud, her words falling like hammer blows. Innovatech wasn't a success. It was hemorrhaging money. He cooked the books, inflated the user numbers, and found a buyer gullible enough to believe him. The small upfront payment he got from the sale, he didn't use it to celebrate. I've cross-referenced the dates. He used every penny to pay off the massive debts he'd been hiding, just before they crushed him. She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a grim, terrible understanding. "That's why the payout was tied to future performance," she said. "He knew there would be no future performance. He sold a ticking time bomb and just hoped he'd be far enough away when it finally exploded. This new venture, this AI company, he's not building a new dream. Helen. He's trying to pull off another magic trick. He needs this new 75 grand, and the matching funds it will unlock, to create the illusion of success. It's a Ponzi scheme. He's trying to raise new money to placate the old investors before they realize they bought a company that was built on lies and come after him with everything they've got." The truth was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. The threat about the lease wasn't just a moment of anger. It was the desperate lashing out of a cornered animal. My son wasn't just entitled. He wasn't just cruel. He was a con man. And he was in far more trouble than a missed rent payment. Sarah closed her laptop, the click echoing in the stillness. "He's not just trying to ruin your credit, Helen," she said, her voice hard as steel. "He's trying to use you as his last human shield before the whole rotten structure collapses on top of him. This is beyond family drama now." She met my gaze, her own eyes resolute. "We're not calling a financial advisor. We're calling a lawyer." First thing in the morning. The Polaris Tower was a monument of glass and steel that pierced the sky, a testament to the new, aggressive form of capitalism that had taken over the city. The lobby felt like a cathedral built to honor money, all soaring ceilings and polished marble that echoed the click of expensive shoes. As Sarah and I ascended in the silent, high-speed elevator, I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were a visitor from a foreign land about to meet a king. Leo's office was on the 48th floor, a corner suite. The door, a single, imposing slab of frosted glass, hissed open to reveal a reception area so minimalist it felt barren. A young woman with a surgically bored expression looked up from her screen, her eyes barely registering our presence before dismissing us. "We're here to see Leo Vance," Sarah said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "He's expecting us." "He wasn't," but Sarah's tone brooked no argument. A moment later, we were ushered into the inner sanctum. Leo's office was designed to intimidate. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a godlike view of the city sprawling below. The desk was a vast expanse of white, clinical-looking material, empty, save for a sleek laptop and a single, perfect succulent in a concrete pot. The air was cool and still. It was the office of a man who had erased all traces of his past. Leo was on a call, his back to us, pacing in front of the window. He was wearing headphones, his voice a low, confident murmur. He gestured for us to sit in the two brutally uncomfortable-looking chairs opposite his desk, a silent assertion of his power. He would see us when he was ready. Sarah did not sit. She walked to the center of the room and stood there, arms crossed. Her presence, a quiet, immovable challenge. I remained standing beside her, clutching my handbag like a shield. Finally, Leo ended his call and turned, a manufactured smile spreading across his face as he removed his headphones. Well, a family reunion, he said, his voice smooth as silk. To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to reconsider my generous investment opportunity? He sank into his enormous, throne-like leather chair, the picture of relaxed power. We're not here to socialize, Leo, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the sterile air. And we're certainly not here to invest. We're here to discuss the outstanding liabilities and fraudulent accounting of a company called Innovatech. The smile on Leo's face didn't so much fall as it was wiped away, leaving behind a hard, blank mask. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but a flicker of panic in his eyes betrayed him. Don't you? Sarah took a step toward the desk. Let me refresh your memory. A sale based on a user base inflated by nearly 300%. Hidden debts paid off with the buyer's seed money. A series of vendor lawsuits settled just before the deal closed. With each point, she took another step, her voice low and precise. A surgeon making careful incisions. It has a name. Leo. It's called wire fraud. He shot to his feet. That is a ridiculous accusation. It's called aggressive growth strategy, something a small-minded bean counter like you could never possibly understand. He turned his attention to me, his voice shifting, trying to find his old leverage. Mom, are you going to let her do this? She's always been jealous of us, of what we have. She's trying to poison you against me. The old Helen would have wavered, torn between her son and the truth. But I was not the old Helen. I looked at the man my son had become, standing in his glass tower built on a foundation of lies, and I felt nothing but a profound, aching pity. Your father built bridges, Leo, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. Bridges people could trust with their lives. He built things that were real. You built a company on thin air and lies. My words hit him harder than any of Sarah's accusations. The mention of his father, of the man whose legacy he so often invoked for his own selfish ends, seemed to sever his last tie to reason. The mask of civility shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. My father? He scoffed, a wild, manic energy entering his eyes. My father was a saint who let you control everything, his money, his dreams. All of it filtered through you. He pointed a trembling finger at me. That money you sacrificed for me, the $150,000 for Innovatech, do you know where that came from? A joint investment account. That was our money. Half of it was my inheritance by right, and you've been holding it over my head like a leash my entire adult life. So fundamentally twisted that I could only stare at him in stunned silence. He was taking the greatest act of love and faith his father and I had ever shown him and recasting it as a theft. He was just getting started. You're the one who's been financially irresponsible, he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space, dangling money in front of me and then snatching it away. You're emotional. You're erratic. You let this bitter, dried-up woman, he spat, gesturing at Sarah, who never built anything in her life, convince you to destroy your own son. He strode around the desk until he was standing directly in front of me, his face contorted with a righteous fury that was utterly terrifying. So here's what's going to happen, he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You are going to transfer the $75,000 into my account by the end of the day. If you don't, I will file a lawsuit. I will sue you for total control of all remaining family assets, on the grounds that you are mentally and emotionally unfit to manage them. I will subpoena your friends. I will bring in psychiatrists. I will prove to a judge that you are being manipulated by a vindictive outside party and that your irrational decisions are endangering the financial legacy my father left for me. I will have you declared legally incompetent. The threat, so much more detailed and monstrous than the one he'd made over the phone, hung in the air between us. He wasn't just threatening to take my money. He was threatening to take my name, my mind, myself. He was threatening to erase me. I felt the world tilt, a wave of dizziness washing over me. But before I could fall, Sarah's hand was on my arm, steady and strong. She stepped in front of me, positioning herself between me and my son. Her face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. You've made your position clear, Leo, she said, her voice like chipping ice. And you've just made the biggest mistake of your life. She turned, her hand still firmly on my elbow, and guided me toward the door. We walked out without a backward glance, leaving him standing alone in the middle of his sterile, glass-walled prison, the ugly echo of his words, the only thing left to keep him company. We did not wait for Leo to make the next move. The moment we left his office, Sarah drove us directly to the law firm that handled her company's accounts. Her call ahead had been brief and urgent. We were met not in a waiting room but in a quiet, wood-paneled library by a senior partner named Arthur Davies. He was a man in his late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes and an air of unshakable calm that was more reassuring than any boisterous display of confidence. For 2 hours, Sarah laid out her findings with the cold precision of a surgeon, while I provided the painful, emotional context. Mr. Davies listened, his hands steepled, his gaze never wavering. He reviewed the documents Sarah had prepared, his expression growing more serious with each page. When we finished, he was silent for a long moment. This is not a family squabble, he said finally, his voice a calm, deep baritone. This is a clear-cut case of financial malfeasance and elder abuse with intent to extort. We will not be on the defensive here. We will set the terms. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon, in a neutral conference room at Mr. Davies's firm. The room was designed to be devoid of personality, a long mahogany table, 12 identical leather chairs, a single, unadorned pitcher of ice water sweating in the center. The only sound was the faint hiss of the air conditioning. It was a place for endings. Leo arrived with a lawyer who looked exactly like the sort of man he would hire, young, slick, with an expensive suit and an air of aggressive self-assurance. Leo himself looked pale and drawn beneath his bravado. He refused to look at me, focusing his attention on a point on the far wall. His lawyer, a Mr. Sloan, began without preamble. He launched into a polished, condescending speech about their profound concern for my well-being. He used words like erratic behavior, uncharacteristic isolation, and potential vulnerability to undue influence. All legal speak for their claim that I was old, confused, and being manipulated by my sister. Therefore, Sloan concluded, placing his hands flat on the table, to protect Mrs. Eva Vance from herself and to preserve the family assets, we will be filing a petition for an immediate conservatorship, with my client, her only son, to be named as conservator. Mr. Davies listened to the entire performance with serene patience, his expression unchanging. When Sloan finished, a smug, expectant silence filled the room. Mr. Stayland, Davies did not address any of the accusations. He simply offered a small, polite smile. "Thank you for that, Mr. Sloan. We appreciate you clarifying your client's position." He leaned forward slightly. "However, we are not here today to discuss my client's mental fitness, which I assure you is sharper than anyone in this room might hope. We are here to discuss your client's imminent and severe criminal liability." With a quiet, deliberate movement, he slid a thick, spiral-bound document across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Leo. On the cover, in simple black letters, were the words, "Innovatech Holdings, LLC, a financial review." Leo stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "Inside that document, Mr. Sade," Davies continued, his calm voice filling the room, "you will find a detailed, evidence-based analysis of your client's previous business venture. You will find proof of systematically inflated user metrics, a timeline of settled lawsuits from unpaid vendors, and a forensic accounting of how the funds from the company's sale were used to settle millions in undisclosed corporate debt rather than being reinvested as per the sales agreement. In short, you will find a textbook case of felony wire fraud." Leo's lawyer snatched the document and began flipping through it, his slick confidence visibly evaporating with each page turn. Leo himself seemed to shrink in his chair, the color draining from his face. "This is slander," Sloan stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "It is evidence, Mr. Davies corrected gently. He then slid a second, much smaller document across the table. It was a single piece of paper. "And this is your client's choice." He let them read it. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint rustle of paper. "This document, Mr. Davies explained, is a legally binding separation and release agreement. It contains three, and only three, provisions. First, Helen Vance's name will be immediately and irrevocably removed as guarantor from the Polaris Tower commercial lease, and from any other financial instrument, loan, or credit line associated with your client. Second, Leo Vance will formally and permanently renounce any and all future claims to his mother's estate, assets, or legal person, effective immediately. Third, all unsolicited contact between your client and my client will cease in perpetuity." He paused, letting the weight of the terms settle in the sterile room. "So, here is the choice before you, Mr. Vance," he said, addressing Leo directly for the first time. Leo flinched. "You can sign this agreement. If you do, my client will consider the personal and financial debts you owe her to be settled. She will walk away, and you will be left to manage your considerable business entanglements on your own. Or, you can refuse to sign. If you do, a full, unredacted copy of this report," he tapped a second copy of the thick document on the table, "will be messengered to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District, the Enforcement Division of the SEC, and, of course, to the legal department of Apex Digital Acquisitions, the firm that was unfortunate enough to purchase Innovatech. I expect they would be very interested in the fraudulent basis of their investment." He leaned back in his chair. "The choice is yours. You have 1 hour to confer with your counsel. We will be waiting in the adjacent room. Mr. Eiley, Davies, Sarah, and I stood in unison. As we reached the door, I stopped and turned back. Leo was staring at the single piece of paper on the table, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. For the first time, he looked up and met my eyes. He looked not like a titan of industry, but like a lost, terrified little boy. The sight no longer moved me. My voice, when I spoke, was not angry or hateful. It was simply weary, empty of all the love I had once poured into him. The $75,000 wasn't the point. Leo, it was never about the money, I said. It was about the respect you owe to the memory of your father, and the decency you owed to me. You have neither. This document is the last thing I will ever do for you. It's a second chance. Something your father and I gave you your entire life. It will be your last one from this family. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with his lawyer and the two terrible futures he had built for himself. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound as final as a gavel strike. We waited in a small, adjacent office that overlooked a serene rooftop garden. For 45 minutes, I said nothing, simply staring at the neatly trimmed boxwoods. My thoughts, a silent storm. Sarah sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm, a quiet, solid presence. I was not waiting for my son to make a decision. I was waiting for a stranger to choose his fate. There was a profound and heartbreaking difference. Finally, Mr. Davies appeared in the doorway. He didn't smile. His expression was one of quiet, professional gravity. "It's done," he said. He signed. He handed me a folder. Inside was the agreement, with Leo's signature, a frantic, angry scrawl so different from his usual confident flourish at the bottom. There was no triumph in that moment, no surge of victory. There was only the quiet, somber release of a great weight being lifted. It felt like the moment a doctor tells you a fever has broken after a long, terrible illness. You are weak, hollowed out, but you know you have survived. The war was over. I had lost a son, but I had won back my life. The months that followed were a quiet revelation. True freedom, I learned, is not just about the battles you win, but about the burdens you set down. The first burden to go was the house. The beautiful, solid home where Robert and I had built our life had also become a museum of my pain, every room echoing with memories both good and tragically spoiled. I spent a month sorting through 40 years of a life lived. I packed away the things that mattered: Robert's books, my favorite teacups, the photo albums. I found a picture of Leo at age 7, his face beaming, a gap where his 2 front teeth should have been. For a moment, my heart ached with the ghost of the mother I had been. I didn't tear the photo up. I simply looked at it for a long moment, whispered, "Goodbye," and placed it in a box I labeled "The Past." Then I sealed the tape. The day before the movers came, Sarah sat with me in the empty living room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the bare windows, casting long shadows on the hardwood floors. I handed her an envelope. She opened it and stared at the cashier's check inside. "Helen." "No," she said, her voice thick. "I didn't do it for this." "I know," I said, placing my hand over hers. "You did it for family. Robert always said you were the true guardian of this family's common sense. He was right. You didn't just save me, Sarah. You saved the legacy he worked his entire life to build. It's only right that a part of it belongs to you." We held each other then, a real hug, one that healed the small, unspoken distances that had grown between us over the years. I never saw Leo again. I heard, through a cousin, that his engagement to Chloe had ended abruptly. Sarah mentioned once, with quiet satisfaction, that a large "For Lease" sign had appeared on the 48th floor of the Polaris Tower. I never asked for more details. His story was no longer my own. He had been a chapter in my life, a long and painful one, but I had finally turned the page. I bought a smaller, brighter condo in a different part of the city, one with a small balcony, perfect for growing orchids. I sold Robert's old grandfather clock. I no longer needed to measure my life by its slow, solemn rhythm. I was on my own time now. And I finally began to think about Robert's true legacy. Not the money in the bank, but the values he lived by: integrity, knowledge, and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. His insults had haunted me for a year, but one word in particular had become my unlikely North Star: useless. Leo had meant it as the ultimate condemnation. I was of no use to him. I came to realize that he was right, and it was the most liberating discovery of my life. My use, my purpose, was not to be a tool for his ambition. It was something I had to define for myself. A year to the day after I walked out of that conference room, I found myself sitting in the sun-drenched atrium of a university library. The air smelled of old paper and new ideas. Across the table from me sat a young woman named Maria. Her eyes were bright with an intelligence and passion that reminded me, painfully, of a younger, more innocent Leo. Maria was the first recipient of the Robert Vance Memorial Scholarship, an endowment I had created to help students pursuing a master's degree in library and information science. She spoke with breathless excitement about her dream of building mobile libraries for rural communities, of bringing the world of books to children who had none. She looked at me, her expression earnest. "I just can't thank you enough, Mrs. Vance. What you've done, it's not just the money. It's knowing someone believes in you. It makes me feel like my dream is useful." There it was, that word. But this time, it didn't sting. It didn't diminish. This time, it shone. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. I thought of Robert's note about the cruise to Italy. It will be worth it to see him fly. We had planted our seed in the wrong soil. But it wasn't too late. There was still so much good soil in the world. My name is Helen. I am 66 years old. And I have learned that a life's value is not measured by the success of your children, but by the integrity with which you live. True usefulness is not about being needed by one person, but about making a quiet, decent, and positive mark on the world. My son tried to erase me. Instead, he gave me the freedom to write my own ending. And you? What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between your own security and the demands of a loved one? I would love to hear your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. I'm always curious to read what you all think. For more stories about life, love, and the strength we find in our hardest moments, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. Wishing you peace and strength.